Gym leaders. They're some of the most powerful, knowledgeable, and skilled trainers in the Pokémon world. Except for when they're not. Despite some of their best efforts, many gym leaders failed to provide enough challenge for a vast number of Pokémon players. Whether we're talking about their initial teams or their post-game variants, most of their rosters come up short in some way, shape, or form. Sometimes their teams lack diversity, other times they lack synergy, and sometimes they look like this. Regardless of whether or not gym leaders are actually too easy, or if most Pokémon players just need to touch some grass, I think we can all agree that most gym leaders don't do so well in showcasing their specialized type. In other words, most of their type-themed teams don't tend to highlight their type very well. Because of this, I've decided to embark on a journey to craft the perfect gym leader for every type in the game. I'll be going type by type to build a full team of 6 Pokémon with thought-out movesets, abilities, items, and more than anything, an emphasis on representing that type as best as possible. Last time we covered the Ice type, and today we'll spread some toxicity by going over the franchise's most malignant type, Poison. Let's quickly go over my guidelines for building these teams. My rules have changed a bit throughout the first 3 videos, but after some extra thought and some feedback from y'all in the comments, I now have a very clear set of standards for team building. As for what's not included, no generational gimmicks, meaning no Megas, no Z-moves, no Dynamax, and no Terastallization. While they're all interesting game mechanics, except for maybe Z-moves, I'd rather not have them detract from the team itself, nor do I want to force a Mega Pokemon or Z-move on the team just because I can. In addition, no legendary, mythical, or paradox Pokemon, and no Ultra Beasts. I don't think this one needs any explanation. Last on the list of don'ts, I'm going to avoid repeating Pokemon between teams. For example, Scizor could easily go on both the Bug and Steel type teams, but by restricting it to only one, I really have to think about where it fits best, both in terms of supporting the team and how well it fits the type. Not to mention, it makes things more interesting for me, plus you get to see more Pokemon over the course of this series. That being said, if a Pokemon is good for 2 teams, I'll likely bring it up as an honorable mention for the one it doesn't go on, just so you know it was on my radar. As for what is allowed, pretty much everything else. Pokemon can learn any of their moves, be them Level Up, TM, Egg Move, or even the ones removed in recent generations, like Pursuit or Return. They also have access to any of their abilities, hidden abilities included, as well as any held item. For those wondering, I won't necessarily abide by item clause, but I also don't plan to put 4 or 5 leftovers on a team. Lastly, just to be as clear as possible, I have 2 main goals in these videos. First is to build a diverse and well-balanced monotype team, one that covers its weaknesses well and would provide some genuine challenge for a player to overcome. Second is to build a team that represents its type as best as possible. This team should showcase what that type is good at, what it's known for, and in several cases, even show why it's better than most people give it credit for. If I ever make a decision with a team that seems strange to you, keep in mind it's likely due to me straddling this line between competitive team and in-game gym leader team. A few other things will come up as I make my way through this series, but for now, that's the rundown on how these teams are built. Huge thanks to my pal Chip for consistently helping me with team building, and with all that said and done, let's talk about the Poison type. In very stark contrast to our last type, Ice, Poison fills a very defensive role in the type chart. It has the 3rd most resistances behind Steel and Fire, resisting Bug, Fairy, Fighting, Grass, and Poison. But unlike the other 2 on the podium, it only has 2 weaknesses, Ground and Psychic. While it isn't rare for a type to have only 2 or even 1 weakness, Poison has the most resistances of any type that does. All this is to say, Poison by nature is a very defensive type. This is even more evident when you look at its offensive matchups. For over half the franchise, Poison was only super effective on Grass. Well, and Bug in Gen 1, but that's a story for another video. While gaining a super effective matchup on Fairies in Gen 6 was a big plus, it didn't necessarily redefine Poison as offensive, especially because it was still resisted by 4 types and completely shut down by Steel. But honestly, Poison has never needed those super effective matchups to perform well in battle, because what the type does best is Poison. Wow, that sounded dumb.
What fire does best is fire.
What I mean to say is, the Poison type focuses on the Poison status. Split into Poison and Badly Poisoned, these status conditions whittle down your opponent over the course of the battle. It's such an important piece of the type that a majority of Poison type moves either inflict poison, have a chance to poison, or do more damage if the opponent is poisoned. Hope you're not tired of hearing me say poison, otherwise it's going to be a long video. Similar to how I've talked about bug types being pests, poison types are well, toxic. They use these tricky moves to wear you down and eat away at your defenses. A quick look through any Poison Gym Leader's team will show off this strategy, with moves like Toxic and Toxic Spike sitting at the forefront, and moves like Acid Spray and Clear Smog providing some support. And if you're wondering why I haven't talked about Poison's base stats yet, it's because there's not much to talk about. Finishing 5th in special defense is definitely good, but everything else is pretty average. That said, I'd rather have these stats than others we've seen in the past. I think that'll do for now, so let's get into the team. Don't forget to drop a like and subscribe for more Pokemon content. My dog and I would both appreciate it. And if you don't, well, that's pretty toxic. I would even say it stings. As many of you likely expected, there's one move we need to get this team off to a strong start. Acid Armor. Just kidding. Obviously the move I'm referring to is Toxic Spikes. Set one layer up and incoming Pokemon get poisoned. A second layer up and they get badly poisoned. Quite a few Pokemon can learn this move, and one can even set them up with an ability, so it's important to think about what else this Pokemon would hopefully accomplish as our lead. And after some consideration, I decided that our first team member should be the Megapede Pokemon, Scolipede. As one of the faster poison types out there, as well as being one of the few Pokemon to get Speed Boost, Scolipede is a great option to reliably set up Toxic Spikes. If it's somehow slower on the first turn, odds are it'll outspeed on the next. But Scolipede does more than just. The reason it's a great lead for this team is because it has a few tools to deal with our opponent's potential lead. With Poison only being weak to Ground and Psychic, odds are the first Pokemon sent out against this team will be a Ground or Psychic type, and Scolipede can deal with both. While we are still weak to Psychic, Megahorn can easily dispatch most Psychic Mons, while also providing Scolipede with strong stab in general. As for ground types, we take neutral damage since we're part bug, and we can even deal super effective damage back to them with Aqua Tail, which also hits the rock and fire types that threaten Scolipede as well. As for our last attack, Poison Jab may round out our dual stab, but Earthquake provides more coverage overall. I know it may seem weird to not include a poison attack, but because of its limited coverage, a few of our Pokemon are actually better off not using an offensive poison move. In fact, many in-game specialists have caught on to this as well, as some of their Pokemon just have a poison status move, or even no poison move at all. This is a great chance to reiterate that poison is a defensive type by nature, and that sometimes the best offense is a good defense. As for a held item, Focus Sash works well since Scolipede's defenses aren't necessarily great, but the more entertaining option is the Pyapa Berry, which halves the damage from a super effective psychic attack. Is it a bit situational? Maybe. But it's a great countermeasure that can really throw the opponent off if they're not prepared for it. While there isn't necessarily a wrong choice for a Toxic Spike lead, I think Scolipede does best at reliably getting them on the field, while also having some great answers for the other trainers starting Pokemon. Question: what Pokemon comes to mind first when you think Poison type? For some of you it's probably Nidoking and Nidoqueen, others might say Muck or Weezing, but personally I always think of the bat Pokemon, Crobat. In addition to being one of the more iconic poison types, Crobat does a number of great things for this team. Its unique type combo of poison and flying defensively covers a third of the type chart, including an immunity to ground and 3 quad resistances. In addition, its speed is incredible, and even though its other stats are more average, it's able to use its vast move pool to pull off all sorts of tricks for the team. Taunt, Confuse Ray, Tailwind, Nasty Plot, it really makes the best of its situation, and is a great utility member for the team. The first move it'll have is Roost. Pretty obvious. Next up is Super Fang, which cuts the foe's HP in half. While the goal is to cover our weaknesses, we're bound to run into a few Pokemon that can make things harder for us, and Super Fang is a great way to break down their defenses. Next is our flying move, of which we have a few options. Brave Bird is the strongest, but deals recoil damage. Dual Wing Beat is the next best choice and would work out just fine, but my pick is Fly. Hear me out. What better way for Toxic Spike damage to rack up than to stall every other turn by using Fly? Yeah, no, you should probably just go with one of these. As for our last move, you could go with Toxic, as there's no guarantee every Pokemon will succumb to the Toxic Spikes. Hell, there's no guarantee the Toxic Spikes will stay on the field, since all it takes is a poison Pokemon switching in to get rid of them. Otherwise, U-Turn is a great option to switch Crobat out, and it synergizes especially well with an upcoming team member. As for ability, I'd opt for Inner Focus, although Infiltrator is fine too. Just a matter of preference. And as for an item, Black Sludge. Basically poison leftovers, Crobat is the best team member to take advantage of this type-specific item. I know the moveset may not look super poisony, but it's definitely obnoxious. Get it? Like noxious gas. Our next team member helps us deal with one of the poison type's biggest hurdles, Steel. With their immunity making them a great check to our team, we need a Pokemon capable of breaking through their tough defenses. After all, it's not like we can whittle them down with poison. Or can we? Next on the squad is the toxic lizard Pokemon, Salazzle. Upon its introduction in Gen 7, Salazzle's main claim to fame was its ability Corrosion, allowing it to poison any Pokemon regardless of their type. This is a really cool ability, but it's just one of the many things Salazzle brings to the table, as its fire typing, solid offensive stats, and helpful status moves are what really make it shine for this team. Our first attack should be obvious. Flamethrower, giving us a way to deal with those steel types. And from here, there are two directions you could go. The first is offensive, with Sludge Wave and Dragon Pulse for stab and coverage, plus Nasty Plot to make Salazzle even stronger. This set works fine, but I thought of a strategy much more unique and much more annoying. Our next two moves would be Encore, which is easy to utilize given Salazzle's high base speed, and Substitute, which is a nice utility move to offset our low defenses. And as for our last move, we'd either have Toxic, making use of Corrosion, or Nasty Plot to add some offensive pressure. I know this may seem like a random assortment of status moves, but I needed to lay them all out before explaining this strategy. With the move Encore in hand, Salazzle locks the foe into using their most recent move. This could be a status move, giving us a chance to set up ourselves, or we could lock them into their last attacking move, like maybe Earthquake. Now you're probably wondering, why would I want them locked into Earthquake when Salazzle is 4 times weak to ground? 2 words, Air Balloon. This held item makes the user immune to ground type moves until the air balloon pops from an attack. If Salazzle is brought in after a Pokemon that feints to a ground move, all it takes is a single Encore and boom, Salazzle is free to set up a sub and do whatever it wants. Even if it doesn't play out in this perfect scenario, the combo of Air Balloon and Encore can really throw the opponent for a loop. And with Substitute giving Salazzle that extra buffer, it can really turn into an obnoxious mid-game threat. I mentioned either Toxic or Nasty Plot for our last move, and truthfully, it all comes down to preference. Of the two, I'd opt for Toxic, because this is the poison-type team after all. Plus, if you put Toxic on Salazzle, Crobat is that much more free to run U-turn instead. Overall, I really like how this set turned out, and I think it adds a lot more to the team than a simple attacking set would do. But if you want to go with
Nasty Plot,
be my guest. With half the team done, one of the big things we need now is defense. While our previous Pokemon fill certain defensive roles, I wouldn't refer to any of them as defensive Pokemon. And this brings me to my first honorable mention, Clodsire. Between having both Unaware and Water Absorb as abilities, sporting a solid defensive typing, and having a massive HP stat, Clodsire quickly rose to fame as one of the best competitive poison Pokemon in Gen 9, even sitting in a higher tier than these monsters. In fact, it's so good it was the very first Pokemon I added to the team. It had a straightforward set of Earthquake and Poison Jab for dual stab, Recover for longevity, and either Rock Slide for coverage or Spikes for extra hazard damage. This set would have worked very well, keeping setup mons at bay with Unaware and healing off any damage, while even hitting the steel types our team struggles with. So all this begs the question, why didn't it stay on the team? While solid competition was part of the reason why, the main issue is that Clodsire is just a little too defensive. I know I said this type specializes in using the poison status to wear down its opponents, but it's just as important for this team to apply offensive pressure once the opponent is poisoned. And Clodsire, with its base 75 attack, isn't really great at that. The same logic can actually apply to Toxapex. It may be one of the best poison mons to date, but that's because all it does is sit there and stall out the opponent with Baneful Bunker and Recover. It may be good at what it does, but it doesn't seem like a good fit for this team. So instead of the extremely defensive prowess that these two offer, this team needs something more in the middle, that can take some damage while also being able to dish it out. And after looking around, I think the best Pokemon for this is the Hexpert Pokemon, Galarian Slowking. And yes, that was Hexpert, as in Hex, Expert. Genius. Off the bat, its typing of Poison and Psychic is great for this team, as it helps us cover the Psychic types that threaten our previous team members. And it does so with some really solid defensive stats as well as an impressive base 110 special attack. Not to mention, it gets Regenerator as a hidden ability, helping it remain healthy over the course of the battle, especially with Crobat being able to U-turn around. As for moves, so many good options. Tons of coverage, plus amazing status moves like Slack Off, Calm Mind, Yawn, and Trick Room. although I don't think our first 3 team members would appreciate that last one. With all these options at our disposal, I think Slowking's best role for this team is to go all out offensive. Sludge Wave would be first, which is actually the first offensive poison move on this team, and I promise it won't be the only one. Next is Psychic, rounding out our dual stab. As for coverage, Flamethrower helps us deal with steel types, and also gives Salazzle a bit of reprieve. And last is a toss-up. Surf is great for covering ground types as well as the rock types that threaten our earlier team members. Or you could go with Ice Beam, which also covers the ground types as well as the flying Pokemon that would be immune to toxic spikes. I'm leaning towards Ice Beam. Surf hits a few more Pokemon, but the team also has water coverage already. But with these 4 attacking moves, Galarian Slowking can take full advantage of the Assault Vest, boosting its special defense by 50%. Oh, also, for all of you pitching a fit about me abbreviating this item as Assfest in the last video, I'm doing it again. You brought this upon yourself. Galarian Slowking is a great linchpin for this team, as it gives us some needed bulk while also threatening over half the Pokemon in the dex with its amazing coverage. For those wondering why I chose Galarian Slowking over Galarian Slowbro, I'm joking. It's because Slowking has better overall defenses, and because I can personally relate to his jokes getting chilly reception.
But you made that joke in the last video.
If there's any one Pokemon I'm anticipating some pushback from in the comments, it's probably this one. The multi-seal Pokemon, Revavroom. While some of you out there may hate this Pokemon, likely due to Team Star, you can't deny that it's pretty damn good. Its signature typing of Steel Poison is one of the best defensive typings in the game. 6 resistances, 3 quad resistances, and an immunity. And it's only weak to Fire and Ground, although Ground is a 4 times weakness. Actually, make that a 3 times weakness. With Revavroom's ability Filter, it receives only 3/4 of the damage from super effective attacks. Even though this only affects Fire and Ground, it's still very helpful, and can easily make the difference between living on a sliver or dying outright. Switching over to stats, Revavroom is solid in almost every category. It's the hardest hitting Pokemon on the team, and with solid base 90 speed, Revavroom can be a big threat once things are a bit whittled down, especially with the setup move, Shift Gear, raising its attack by 1 stage and speed by 2. This is another reason why I'd go with Toxic on Salazzle over Nasty Plot, as Revavroom is overall a better setup choice. As for its other attacks, Gunk Shot hits like a truck, and while slightly inaccurate, the extra 40 base power it has on Poison Jab is quite worth the trade-off. Iron Head finishes out our dual stab, although Spin Out is slightly stronger if you don't mind losing the speed. Lastly, High Horsepower is solid coverage as it hits the Steel and Poison types that put a stop to our T-Spikes. All that's left is to give it a Lumberry, and we have a great setup option for the team. It may seem unorthodox, and part of that may just be the hate surrounding Object Mons, but Revavroom is actually a really solid Pokemon. Then again, this was pretty damn stupid, so I can understand the hate. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't mention a number of great poison types that didn't make the cut. Nidoking and Nidoqueen are 2 of the most iconic poison types, and while they do well with their Sheer Force Life Orb combo, Galarian Slowking works better for the team due to its bulk and regeneration. Glimmora sports the new Toxic Debris ability, making it set up a Toxic Spike if hit by a physical attack. A great idea, but not necessarily more reliable. Lastly, Galarian Wheezing. Yeah, this one's only because of the hat. That would have been a great thumbnail. As for our last Pokemon, we'll be taking advantage of the best dual type we can. Poison Dark, as it's only weak to ground and immune to Poison's other weakness of Psychic. 4 lines make use of this typing, and while Drapion and Skuntank aren't terrible, they're not as good as the other 2. And it was at this point that I realized I had to make 2 calls in one. Full disclosure, I haven't even thought about making the Dark type video yet, but after some quick thought, it's likely the Dark type team would want a Poison type to deal with fairies. And so lies the question, which Pokemon goes where? There really isn't a wrong choice, but I decided for this team to take the Pin Cluster Pokemon, Overqwil. Ironically enough, this is a bit backwards based on their primary and secondary typings, but Alolan Muck was more impactful on its release because of its new Dark typing, while Overqwil was given a signature Poison type move, Barb Barrage, which has a 30% chance to poison and deals double damage if the target is already poisoned. While this may not be extremely reliable, you can't argue that it doesn't feel gym leader-y. Some things just feel like a gym leader thing to do, and picking a Pokemon's signature move for style points is definitely one of those things. Next it would have Crunch, both as dual stab and to shut down psychic types. Third is Liquidation, helping combat ground types, and another reason why you might want to run Ice Beam on Slowking over Surf. And to finish it up, Swords Dance. Seems fitting for the gym leader's ace to reverse sweep you. I guess that's something else I haven't really talked about. A gym leader's ace is the final Pokemon they send out in battle, and usually the one most associated with their character. In the first 3 videos, those Pokemon were, I guess spoiler if you haven't seen them yet, Snorlax, Volcarona, and Cetitan. The first 2 are pretty iconic, and while Cetitan is still new, I think it's very representative of the ice type as a whole. As for this team, Overqwil would be the last Pokemon sent out, but it doesn't really feel like a great ace Pokemon. I mean hell, it was almost this team's lead, as it has a lot of the similar advantages that Scolipede does. If anything, I feel like Crobat is a better face for the team, but it's definitely not the last Pokemon you'd want sent out. Honestly, maybe I should have just put Nidoking on here. Well, what do you think? These 6 are just my choices, so let me know what your poison-type team would be in the comments. There's quite a few amazing Poisonmons I didn't even mention, so I'm excited to see what y'all come up with. This has definitely been my favorite team to build thus far, and I hope you have fun if you do it too. Anyways, thanks for watching. Genuinely, thank you. I really appreciate you spending your time on my content. So as thanks for making it to the end of the video, here's a picture of my dog. Talk to y'all soon.